I'd like to welcome Cheryl Marriot. Cheryl Marriot is Head of Conservation at Cornwall Wildlife Trust, and she's really keen that tree planting should be done properly and that it doesn't have negative impacts upon existing habitat. In other words, just whacking up trees with plastic guards at certain distances apart is really not enough, and it's got to be done with care and knowledge of the ecology of the site. And she's written an excellent article in the Wildlife magazine called Seeing the Wood for the Trees, which also happens to be, don't know if you say, the title of her talk today. So over to you, Cheryl. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Lindsay. You nicked a bit of my own introduction, but that's fine. I'll share my screen now. This is a bit I hate. Share. Can I have some thumbs up that you can see my slides? Thanks, Connor. Yeah, great. Well, I'm going to bring you back down to a Cornwall level now after that really great global introduction. Just on the I'll touch on rewilding here and there because you can't not really. It's so related to everything now. But in our next Wild Cornwall magazine, I'm just writing an article now that's featuring various landowners across Cornwall that are interested in wilding and rewilding, or that have actually started doing some rewilding. So if you want to know what's happening now in Cornwall, you'll have to get hold of our membership magazine. Okay, so yeah, Seeing the Woods for the Trees. I am basing this talk on that article. What I'm not trying to do is to dampen anyone's enthusiasm for planting trees. That's not my aim. But if I can just highlight some of the things to bear in mind before you reach for a spade and do that tree planting, that's what I'm trying to do. Because it's not always as straightforward as you might think. So, right, I'm trying to move a slide along. Oh dear. This is every speaker's nightmare when slides don't move. I'm going to stop sharing a second, bear with me. Have a look out the window, take some deep breaths, that's what I need to do.
I think Ian solved the same problem earlier today in the practice, Cheryl.
Ah.
Have a look to see whether your cursor, if you move it right into the bottom left-hand side, whether it illuminates a forward and back button. So take your mouse right into the left-hand side. Yeah. Anything coming up?
No.
Oh, hold on.
Oh.
Yeah, try that.
I'm pressing next.
It's in a different place on yours. It's not working.
Oh, it is. Yay.
Okay. I'll shut up again.
Right. Well, because now I've lost my flow, and here's a bizarre slide for you. So I was looking through photos to include in the talk, and I came across this one from 2 years ago. I don't know if Lizzie Stroud is on this conference somewhere. Hi, Lizzie, if you are, from Rail Holiday, St. Germans. This is Lizzie and I. She's dressed up as a hornet, and I'm a frog. And that's us on the tube in London going to join Chris Packham's the People's Walk for Wildlife. You're going to hear a lot about the dual crisis that we've got going on. Well, 3 crises now, haven't we, with this pandemic? But this was about the ecological crisis, 56% of species in decline. And people wanting to make the point to government that this is just not good enough, that these declines in species will become extinctions if we don't do something soon. Then that was September 2 years ago. September last year, I was in Truro on one of the climate marches. We've been doing a lot of thinking at Cornwall Wildlife Trust, because clearly the climate crisis is one of the biggest threats to wildlife, if not the biggest threat. We're a wildlife charity. This is what we do. So what's our role in the climate emergency? We've dabbled in the past with trying to encourage people to reduce emissions. It didn't really feel like that was our core business, that we were the right people to do that. And really what we want to be trying to do is to tackle both of these things at the same time, because they are so intertwined. So how can we do that, and what's our role in it? We're not the only ones thinking this way, of course, and we have a national organisation of the Wildlife Trust that tries to corral all the other wildlife trusts together, and they've just produced a really nice summary of natural solutions to climate change, and it's called Let Nature Help. And you can do an internet search for that and get yourselves a copy. I'll be introducing some of the ideas now. I'm hoping that my talk is quite a good foundation for Ian to follow with his natural capital talk. So we can recover nature and tackle the climate crisis at the same time, which is great news. This is one of the graphics from the document. It's looking at what we need to do in terms of carbon dioxide mitigation to meet the Paris Agreement. And the good news is 37% of that, so over a third of that, can be done through natural systems. So that's great. That means these things are really worth doing. That's great for us in the business of wildlife conservation, because there's an extra incentive to look after wildlife and restore ecosystems. A big thing to remember, of course, is that 2/3 of it can't be done. That leads me on to my one of 3 take-home messages. I'm very aware there's a lot of information coming your way today, so my take-home messages are going to be very clear. There's the first one. Natural solutions are not enough on their own, and you, I'm sure, know this, but going out, planting some trees, buying an electric car, that's not enough. That's not going to cut it. We've got to be thinking of reducing energy demand as well. But you all know that, but I think it's worth having that in our minds, that when we're getting on with these natural solutions, we've still got to do the other stuff. Tree planting, of course, is capturing lots of people's imagination. It's a popular thing to do, and rightly so, because woodlands are the habitat that locks in most carbon. So if we want to lock in carbon quickly, woodlands are a great way to do that. As the trees grow and the wood develops, you're getting more and more locked in over the decades. That's why there's so much enthusiasm for tree planting. It has the added advantage, of course, that if we're going to then harvest timber, that's a renewable source of building materials, which can replace high carbon building materials, and of course renewable fuels as well we can get from our woodlands. So you can absolutely see why there's so much enthusiasm for tree planting. But straight on to my take-home message number 2, other natural solutions are available. And this is one of the things I'm hoping that people can think about. Are there other things we could be doing? Because arguably some of these other natural solutions can be excellent for enhancing wildlife, can be better for enhancing wildlife than plantations of trees. And if we're trying to tackle both of these crises at the same time, is it worth, in some instances, putting in natural solutions that might not trap so much carbon, but will deliver more for the ecological crisis? These are the kind of thoughts that I'm hoping will go through people's heads when they're planning what to do. So other natural solutions, this is just quite a bit of rough grassland on one of our nature reserves. We haven't got the management here quite spot on yet, but this is a diverse habitat. It's full of invertebrates that are food for the small mammals and the birds and everything else. This is locking in carbon, not as much as a woodland, but it's still doing it. It's also, we've got the Eastleigh River down the bottom there. So this is slowing water down and helping to keep that river clean as well. So these habitats are delivering lots of things, and I'm sure we'll hear about this from Ian as well. Not the brightest photo ever, but that's a lovely bit of wetland in West Penwith in Cornwall. We've got sundews in here, lots of those much rarer plants which we just don't have as many wetlands as we used to, because so much land has been drained. These wet habitats, when the vegetation dies down, it's not rotting because it's waterlogged, and you're getting these peaty valley bottom peats forming, brilliant carbon stores. So these kind of habitats are really delivering. Connor's already mentioned one of my favourite topics, and close to Chris James's heart as well, which is beavers. I hope you can make that out. There's a big pile of sticks on an island. This isn't Canada. This is 10 minutes away from Truro, at Woodland Valley Farm, and a beaver lodge in the pond there. That's one of the Cornwall beavers looking not very happy that we've interrupted her dinner. But it's really what beavers are doing that's really interesting. As a natural solution, they are a natural solution in themselves. There's one of the beaver dams you can see there. Lots of carbon locked up in the dam itself, in the sticks that they've piled up. All the silt that builds up behind is another carbon store and is locking up pollutants as well. They're creating new wetlands. So like the wetland we just saw, beavers can create that. They can do it for us, and they can do it much better and much more cheaply, and they maintain it for us as well. Also, when we're thinking about resilience of ecosystems to climate change, we're getting more heavy rainfall events. Now, the beaver dams slow down the flow and can protect the wildlife downstream and the people, the human species downstream, from flood events. And also, they're storing so much water. It's like a big sponge now, the habitat there where the beavers are. And in dry periods, they're holding water back and keeping the streams flowing. So they really are the full package. Just jumping out of Cornwall a minute, this is Idaho in the States. Now, there were some folks doing some target practice, and a stray spark started a wildfire here, and it burnt 65,000 acres of land. That bit there that you can see, which hasn't been burnt, is beaver-created wetland. There's a huge amount of interest in the States for restoring the beaver population so that they can protect against forest fires. So as natural solutions go, if we can make space for beavers and try and reduce any conflict that they might bring when they get into places we don't want them to, I think we'll be on to a winner. It's not just terrestrial habitats, of course. Some marine habitats are superb at locking up carbon, like these seagrass beds that we get on the south coast of Cornwall around the Isles of Scilly. Salt marshes as well, very good carbon stores and can protect us from storms. So nature really can provide if we restore it and protect it. There is research in Wales for replanting some seagrass beds where they've been lost. We don't think there's much opportunity for that in Cornwall. It's more here about protecting what we've got. So protecting it from any trawling operations or moorings that can scrape the bottom of scrape these habitats, and also pollution coming in from the land. I'm a bit worried about some of the soil pollution that comes down at those south coast estuaries, whether they might smother our seagrass. So we've really got to protect what we've got. This is a terrible photo, but it demonstrates a point, I hope. I've shown you mostly now semi-natural habitats, so those scruffy bits of Cornwall where wildlife is still there. But what about the more productive land? Because 78% of Cornwall is productive land. If we can make some small changes with farmers and landowners to better manage soils, then we can have a huge benefit across such a large area. So this is in the Drift Reservoir catchment. We have a project there funded by South West Water, part of their upstream thinking programme. Of course, the water company wants to keep soil out of the reservoir, so that's why they're investing for us to work with farmers. So the grasslands there, when they lose vigour, they need reseeding, and so that involves, traditionally, is ploughed and reseeded. You can see how this field is just left bare to the elements, and you can hopefully just about make out that there's water on the right hand side. So this field is losing soil. That's what it looks like now. It was reseeded at that point, but what they do now and what they've tried following advice from our farm advisors, is to, instead of ploughing, they'll reseed into the existing sward. So they just add more seed into the existing sward so that it doesn't get left bare like that. And there's all kinds of advances in farming and just new methods that are great for the farmer and can save money, but also very good for keeping the soil carbon locked up where we want it and keeping the soil where everyone wants it, which is on the fields. So it's not just about semi-natural habitats. We can work on productive farmland and make that better and increase the carbon content. Chris knows way more about this than me. I feel a bit of a fraud talking about it, but I just wanted to make that point. Back to trees though. Here's some oaks that I grew from last year. So that really wet winter, I didn't know how well they do, but I was quite surprised about the success rate. You can all have a go at this. Found Tetra Packs really good to grow them in. And just a little tip that I found, because all the advice said put 2 in each pot, but actually most of them did germinate too, so I wouldn't put 2 in, I'd just put 1 next time and I'll try it again. Yeah, let's be thinking then about trees and tree planting. This, again, not the best photo because it's just on my phone, but that's one of our nature reserves again, but a really well-laden hawthorn tree. I put that in to remind myself that it isn't just about oaks. Let's get some of the smaller scrubby species, because from a wildlife point of view, if you're not thinking about timber and produce, then let's get some of these scrubby ones in. Be interested to know if anyone's grown acorns with hawthorn in the same pot, and then you plant them so you've got a ready-made tree guard. And be really fascinated to know if anyone's been able to do that. I'm jumping out of Cornwall here to the Lake District to demonstrate another point about where you plant trees, and again Ian will reinforce some of this, I'm sure. Trees planted here on this steep grassland, the organisation that planted them there checked their records, and it said that it gave them the impression that that was an okay place to plant trees. In the middle of winter, if you've not got an expert eye, and I'm no botanist, I'd get others in to help me with this, but somewhere can look very uninteresting and like a blank canvas. So you say, oh great, let's get some trees in there. There was uproar, and this made the papers, because this is very wildflower rich grassland that got planted into. So somewhere can look very, very different in the middle of winter when you're planting trees to what it looks like in the spring and summer. So those trees have been taken out and put somewhere else. It was a big waste of everyone's time and quite damaging to the reputation of the organisation that put them in. So you do need a bit of help when you're choosing where to put them, unless you've got those skills. We found this in southeast Cornwall and along the East Blue River there. We've worked with a lot of farmers over that way, and our records showed some of these grasslands as not being that interesting. But when we got out on site, we were really surprised at how species rich they were. So we could have made the same mistake if we hadn't gone out at the right time of year. And our surveyor, Sue, that did a lot of that work, said some of them, they're steep grasslands, so they are harder to agriculturally improve, so that you would expect that these might be a bit better for wildlife. But she said with her eyes shut, she could tell that they were good grasslands just because of the sound coming off them, the buzzing and all the crickets and all those invertebrates living in there. So even with your eyes shut at the right time of year, you might be able to tell how good a grassland is. We don't want to swap one habitat for another. If the trees had been left, I'll just switch back. If the trees had been left there, the flowers would have come back the following year, but then these grasslands do need grazing to keep them down. So we would have started to lose the diversity of flowers. And of course, when the trees there grow up and the canopy closes, you get shade, then you end up with a net reduction in wildlife if those trees had been allowed to stay. Just the way that we plant trees is being scrutinised. I've had a few run-ins on Twitter myself about with people saying, why are you still using plastic tubes to plant trees? This is on the River Cobar. Some of our volunteers so upstream of Helston. And we have planted some trees in here with the plastic tubes and the wooden stakes, but the farmer he was very keen to have some trees in there. It's not a very productive bit of ground because it gets wet, but it wasn't floristically interesting either. So that was a good place to store a bit of carbon and to slow the flow of water coming down the hill. You can't see how steep it is from the photo, but to slow the flow and try and lock up any nutrients to stop them going into the water. Because the water from the River Cober gets taken out by South West Water further down, and that's where Helston and the Lizard get their drinking water from. It is quite satisfying planting trees like this, because you go there at the beginning of the day, there's no woodland. When you pack up to leave at the end, you've done something. You look at it and you've planted something. And there isn't always a seed source for natural regeneration to happen. In this case, there is. You can see the trees in the Cornish hedgerow. But there is always a place for planting in this way. But it's good if we go through the thought process of, could natural regeneration be an option? It's a lower carbon way of doing it. You're not bringing in trees from elsewhere that could be bringing disease with them. Of course, we might have just planted some beaver food for the future there, which is a point that I wanted to make about future proofing. It's likely that we will get more beavers in Cornwall. I certainly hope we do. So perhaps we shouldn't be planting orchards or timber trees close, within 20 metres at least of a watercourse. We'll see what Chris might have something to say on that as well, but let's future-proof it and not create conflict for the future, because beavers are very good coppicers, as you know. This just another one of our nature reserves where we had to do a lot of clearance to take laurel out that had been planted years ago as game bird cover, not by us clearly, but we've been restoring this woodland, Pendarvis woodland near Camborne. You might be able to spot some tree tubes in there, and sometimes your woodland grant scheme insists that you do plant trees, so we probably need to be pushing back a bit on this, because there's lots of natural regeneration in there, and some of the trees that are sprouting themselves will probably overtake the ones planted in tubes very quickly. And so we're rethinking about how we do some of this, and that's quite right. Not the best photo again. I was just on a walk on Bodmin Moor and looked down, and this sort of will chime with some of Connor's rewilding points here. You see on the left that the hedgerow that goes along the middle there, on the left-hand side where there's quite high grazing pressure, not a tree or shrub to be seen. Overgrazed, possibly compacted as well, so not doing all it could for carbon storage or any other services that nature can provide. On the right-hand side, I don't know the history of it, I can only assume they didn't graze it for a while, and so some trees and shrubs got away, and now we've got this lovely mosaic of grassland and trees and more scrubby areas, so delivering far more for wildlife than the area on the left, and storing more carbon as well. It's interesting, once you start thinking like this, you do start to view the landscape around you quite differently. This, nearly there, this is my third take-home message, and the tree planting needs some ecological know-how. We're learning all the time and trying to adapt what we do at Cornwall Wildlife Trust. We don't have all the answers. We do have botanists that can give advice. And there's lots of ecological consultants out there as well that can do the same. So it's over to you, really. It's a lovely weekend. It's a very good acorn year. So perhaps that would be a good thing to do over the weekend, is to go and collect some yourself. Another question I've got, actually, and I don't know, perhaps people can put answers in the chat if you know. We were talking about seed collection me and colleagues, and one of them said that we should not encourage people to collect acorns in like National Trust properties or gardens, that kind of place, because you might get lots of odd cultivars, is what she said. But then I was thinking about that, and with all the new plant diseases coming in, are we best to plant a big variety, and should we be as precious about the cultivars of oak that we're growing on? So I don't know the answer. I'd be interested in anyone else's perspective on that.